Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Scott Ball podcast. Today we're honing in on the connection between Norwich City and the Scotland national team. Right now there are three internationals that should, if fit and available, make the Euro squad. They are McLean, Angus Gunn and Grant Hanley. To talk through these players with me today is a Norwich City expert who's a visual journalist with Norwich City and also a contributor to the Pink Un podcast. It's Adam Harvey. Firstly, Adam, thanks very much for joining me today. If you could quickly just tell me a bit about how you started supporting Norwich City and the media work that you're involved in.
Yeah, so I was born in Norfolk, which, anyone that's been down to this part of the world will know that Norwich is the only professional club sort of in the region, going as far as Ipswich down in Suffolk, which is, of course, about 40 miles south of the border. So it's a long old way. So if you're born in Norfolk, you tend to support Norwich. So that kind of was my reasoning. Had a season ticket for sort of 10 plus seasons. Always wanted to get into the media world. Decided that, the best route to go down would be university. So I went and done university, came back, and thankfully an opportunity came up to join Norwich and sort of cover the club that I love and I've always supported, which is a privilege to be kind of in that space and involved in that on a daily basis. I absolutely love what I do, and that's obviously the best way to sort of live your life and do work that you enjoy. So yeah, all of that combined, and then sort of having the element of the podcast on the side, which kind of gives me a little bit of a backseat to discuss Norwich, maybe a way sort of mixed of professional and personal enjoyment, which is good.
What an opportunity to join the club you support and work for them. That's amazing. And I've also checked out your podcast, The Pink Un. It's great. Looked into some of this stuff. So I'll link that once I publish this episode. Just on this season then, Adam, it's been a good season for Norwich. Should make the playoffs now, but your rivals, Ipswich, have also had a very good season. What have you made of this campaign and championship overall?
Yeah, it's been an absolute rollercoaster season. I mean, from a Norwich perspective, it's one that, last season was disappointing. Obviously, we were one of the sides that were relegated from the Premier League, and with that comes expectation that you should be in and around kind of the top two ideally, but at least the playoffs. That didn't transpire. Dean Smith was sacked. We brought in David Wagner halfway through that season. Had the impact initially, didn't really work out towards the latter stages, just one win in 11. Lots of pressure on him to start the season well, and he did do that to his credit. We were sort of top of the league in and around the September period before a really rapid decline around autumn. It felt like he was probably going to lose his job, and there was lots of pressure on him at that point. We went to Cardiff away. We were 2-1 down with 10 minutes to go, won the game 3-2. And from that moment on, it's kind of been a bit of a revival mission. And he's got us in and around the playoffs. Based on 2024 form, our home form's been off the scale. We've not lost at home since early November. So, that's sort of over 6-7 months now since we last lost at home. And yeah, it feels like the momentum's going upwards, heading into a playoff campaign, which of course, is exciting for us. A chance to get back to the Premier League, particularly given, as you mentioned, our rivals with a big win last night. And it looks like they're sort of within touching distance now of return to the top flight. I think most Norwich fans and probably most Ipswich fans, if you ask them, would fancy an East Anglian derby in the Premier League. So fingers crossed we can navigate a route to Wembley and then maybe a promotion back to the top flight.
On to the connection then between the Scotland national team and Norwich City. One of the main reasons I actually wanted to chat to you was I saw that McLean's actually been voted as the club's player of the year, that was voted for by the fans. He's now in his 6th season at Norwich City, signed from Aberdeen. He was a very good player in the Scottish Premiership with St Mirren and Aberdeen. He's gone down to make a great career for himself in England. What did you make of that player of the season award, and how would you evaluate his season overall for Norwich this year?
Yeah, I think this is a decision that's probably divided fans. If you go based on sort of pure quality and what he's maybe contributed in terms of goals and assists, obviously Kenny McLean's not the sort of player you'd go for. You'd probably go for a Gabriel Zara, who's got 25 goal contributions in the Championship this season, probably a step above Norwich in terms of his levels. You got the likes of Jonathan Rose, had a breakthrough season, maybe injuries blighted his chances. Josh Sargent, anyone that watches the Championship would know his quality. There was lots of players up for the award, but I think Kenny McLean probably won it based on consistency. He's been sort of played in a multitude of positions this season, from central defence at some points to central midfield, but he's kind of been the glue that's always been there, and he's consistently performed to sort of 7 out of 10 levels week in, week out. And he's sort of divided Norwich fans' opinions down the years. There's been spells where he's kind of been a little bit of a scapegoat at points, and I think, that's probably a little bit unfair at times, but this season, I think you'd be hard sort of graph to find any Norwich fan that would have sort of begrudged him picking up the award for player of the season. As I sort of mentioned, I think, points where it was dark days for the club around the autumn period, he kind of came out and faced it up and sort of showed his leadership ability, which, for a player who's sort of in his 30s now and has been round the block, played, of course, in Europe and played for his country, and of course played in the Premier League with Norwich City. He knows what it takes to kind of get a group back on board, and I think him and David Wagner between them, deserve huge credit for getting Norwich to where they are at the moment.
That's interesting. Yeah, it sounds like he's got a similar reputation amongst his manager Wagner as he does with Scotland manager Steve Clarke. He's not an automatic starter for Scotland, but he's a very trusted lieutenant, if you like, under Steve Clarke. He actually scored a very famous goal for us, probably the clinching goal for us to get to the Euros away in Norway. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. Memorable moment for all Scotland fans. Yeah, just on McLean, you've touched upon it there, but what would you say his overall reputation and status is amongst the fan base at Norwich? As I say, he's been there for about 6 years now.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, he's a player who's played kind of in excess of 200 games now for the club. And, I think when you get to that sort of level, most people maybe feel they're sort of bordering on club legend status with Kenny McLean. I think probably up till this season, he was sort of a player that's been selected by every manager. And there's obviously a reason for that. But the fans maybe didn't understand that. Or at times, I think, as I sort of mentioned, he'd been a bit of a scapegoat for certain performances and things he'd said at different points that had maybe rubbed the fans up the wrong way. But I feel that, now it's kind of he's one of the first names on the team sheet. It doesn't really matter where he plays; he'll give 100%, and I think that's pretty much all Norwich fans ever ask of their players is players that are dedicated to the cause and will give 100%. And in the Championship, I think there's probably not many midfielders up to his level in terms of consistency and what he brings to this side. And I think it allows the likes of Zara, Boissin, Johnny Rowe to maybe go and express themselves in those areas where they know there's a player that's sort of behind them that's going to be there. That if they do make a mistake, they've got someone behind them to mop it up and sort of get them back moving forward. So I think he's a crucial cog, and as I mentioned, I think every manager he's ever played under at Norwich has always selected him in their team, and I think that probably speaks volumes for him as a person and a professional on the pitch.
Yeah, I think the key word with McLean there, you mentioned his consistency. Another thing that stood out about him to me when I looked at stats is he started every single Championship match this season, all 45. You touched upon it at some point there that he's played in a multitude of positions. I was aware that he played a number of games at centre-back. I was just wondering how he got on there. He's now 32, so I think Wagner actually intimated that could be a potential future role for him. And within the Scotland team, we play 3 at the back with a left-sided centre-back. Do you think that's a role that he excelled in?
Yeah, I'd say so. It was a period where we had a lot of injuries in defence, and David Wagner likes to build up from the back, so ideally he wants central defenders that are capable with the ball at their feet, and we're not really stocked with those kind of players. We've got lots of experienced pros, but maybe not in the calibre of your sort of, more modern-day young central defender who's maybe been brought up through systems at academy level to know how to deal with the ball at their feet. Grant Hanley's not a natural ball playing centre back. Ben Gibson's not a natural ball playing centre back. Could go on through our squad, and I think at that point Wagner felt, particularly kind of given the amount of pressure that he was under and Norwich were under, to try and make a change, to try and find a system that was going to work. He explored the opportunity to play Kenny McLean at defence, and even though I suppose his maybe defensive capabilities at different points were quite evident, I think certainly for what he brought in terms of the leadership from the back, his ability with the ball, obviously in passing range, is spot on for what Norwich were trying to do. And at Championship level, when you're playing certain teams that are maybe not up to the levels at international level, or even in the Premier League, you probably get away with that a little bit more. Obviously, he's not naturally, someone who's got a lot of pace. So I suppose that also helps him a little bit, given that, the Championship's a little bit more physical rather than, obviously it's got a few pacey players within it, but it's more of a physical league. And I think maybe him personally, he dealt with that quite well. And I certainly feel that moving forwards, obviously it'd be interesting to see if David Wagner sticks around at Norwich next season. But I think if he is here, then there could be an option for him to move into that, particularly given our new sporting director. It kind of outlined the football he wants to see this club playing, and it is very much ball possession football, and Kenny McLean feels like he fits the bill for that.
Okay, on to the next Scotland international on the books in Norwich City, goalkeeper Angus Gunn. He's still relatively new to the Scotland setup, so it was a bit controversial when somebody who, like Gunn, has chosen to select England before opts to play for Scotland, but he's done very well for us, capped 9 times now. I heard recently David Wagner refer to him as, in his opinion, the best goalkeeper in the Championship. How would you rate Angus Gunn?
Yeah, I'd agree with that assessment. I mean, I think you look at now down the Championship at sort of like the shot save ratio, Angus Gunn's up there, clean sheets, he's up there at the moment. And I think what he's earned Norwich in terms of points this season can't be undermined. There's been some really crucial match winning saves I could name 4 or 5 off the top of my head this season. And I think that's, a key kind of pillar of him as a player in this side. We've had Tim Krul before him, who's obviously a well-renowned goalkeeper for Holland and been, at the top flight level at lots of points. But I think maybe errors in his game had cost Norwich various points, points on the road at different times last season, and even home games where maybe, he'd come under fire for that. Angus Gunn, much more cool, calm, collected in terms of his presence, and obviously he's a big lad. He knows I suppose he takes up a lot of the goal, and maybe that can be quite distracting for a lot of opposition players. And I feel like this season he's kicked on. He's kind of been given that number one shirt, and I feel like that probably throughout his career has maybe been his downfall. He obviously came to Norwich on loan a number of years back now, got the number one shirt for a season, went to Southampton in the Premier League, didn't work out for him there, returned back to Norwich, and as I kind of mentioned, he was the understudy to Tim Krul. And I think probably for him, and obviously he's got the connections to his dad, and who's well connected to Norwich City Football Club as well. And I think probably within his camp, you could sense a frustration that he wasn't getting those minutes on the pitch. But this season he's got them, and to his credit, he's taken them. And I think, he's a player that is out of contract next summer. And I feel if Norwich aren't in the Premier League this summer, could be a chance for him maybe to get some interest from Premier League clubs, because I think he's more than merited it. And it'd be interesting to see where he decides to go, whether he decides to stick around with us or make the move potentially this summer.
Yeah, that was my next question, actually. He's 28 now, which in goalkeepers' terms is relatively young. And he has had a big move before. I think it was $13.5 million Southampton played for him. Had a full England call-up as well, so obviously he's been held in high regard previously. What would you say Angus Gunn's ceiling is? Do you think he has what it takes to go up to the next level and play a good Premier League side?
Yeah, I think this summer's big for him. Obviously, if he goes out to the Euros and performs, it feels like his stock could potentially rise even higher than maybe it would be just based on his Norwich performances this season. Obviously, you would have seen it yourself, what he's doing on the international stage. He's been getting lots of plaudits, and the clean sheets he kept in sort of the first couple of games against some big nations. I think, that's clearly going to be something that other sides around the top flight and maybe across Europe would be well aware of. And then you add that to everything I spoke about in terms of his Norwich form. It feels like his leadership and his commanding of the box has gone up a level. I think plenty of the defenders in the Norwich back line would have spoken at different points this season, and they've mentioned, you feel so much more comfortable when you've got a goalkeeper behind you, where if you make a mistake, then you can trust him to get you out of that mistake, and he's done that on plenty of occasions this season. And for me, the points that Norwich maybe have required to get into the top six, I think he's been probably the reason they're there, because he's made them up with so many match-winning saves or points where we've maybe been clinging on, and he's been the one that's came out and made commanding sort of collecting the ball or making big saves at different moments where he's had to be switched on, particularly in games where we've been dominant and maybe he's not had a lot to do, but that one moment could potentially define a game, he's been there. And I think for those reasons, and increasingly the international presence, I think the ceiling for him is probably at least the Premier League. How high? It's maybe up for debate. Obviously you look at the kind of the calibre of goalkeepers now across world football. It feels like you need to be good with the ball at your feet. He's definitely in that camp. He's obviously been schooled by Pep Guardiola at Manchester City. He's comfortable with the ball, but I think now it probably feels for me top half Premier League. Maybe sort of lower echelons of that. There's potential there, I suppose. sort of the Evertons of the world, those kind of clubs. Yeah, there could potentially be an opportunity for him. I think if those sides see him.
You mentioned the word presence. I think that's what stands out about Angus Gunn. 6'5". He fills the goal, and he's good at taking the ball from crosses as well. Just on to the next player, Grant Hanley. He's quite a divisive figure in Scottish football circles. I believe he may well have a similar reputation amongst Norwich fans. He's been there for a number of years now as well, 7 years, I believe, a year longer than Kenny McLean. He's had a frustrating season this year with injuries. I think he injured his Achilles last year, and he struggled to get back to full fitness this season. Would you say he's been missed this season? And what's his overall reputation like as a Norwich City player? Yeah,
he's definitely a Marmite kind of player amongst Norwich fans. As you mentioned, arrived kind of in a new era for the club under Daniel Farke. We'd just lost 4-0 at Millwall, and it was pretty clear that our defence needed someone maybe with a little bit more championship experience, a bit more leadership. And of course, he fitted that bill perfectly after sort of falling out of favour at Newcastle. And the first couple of seasons, he was sort of monumental, I suppose, in the upturn of Norwich and his ability in terms of, he's a sort of old school defender, kick it, head it. He's more than comfortable if you lob balls into the box. That's his kind of bread and butter. But also I felt like Farke maybe developed his ball playing ability a little bit more for someone who's sort of an older defender that, obviously know that's difficult to sort of coach that maybe when you get a little bit older, but it felt like he maybe got the best out of him for those reasons, and he was actually a pretty well-liked character, but injuries really have sort of blighted his whole career here. Different spells where maybe he was getting to his top form and sort of that explosive pace that he has actually got, which is, when you look at him as a player you don't really think he's got, but certain times I've seen him in a foot race and he's won it, but sort of ever since the injuries, he's just not quite been the same player. He came back into the side, as you mentioned, after a really long-term injury. Big injury, Achilles injuries can be sort of big for any young player, particularly an older player who's sort of at the latter stages of their career. It can be even more detrimental, and he wasn't at his best. The club decided, and him personally, to put himself on sort of a personal fitness programme, and I suppose with the hope of maybe trying to get in and around that Scotland setup for the Euros. I don't expect to see him get any minutes this season, maybe a few off the bench if Norwich are in the playoffs and trying to see out a game. For that reason, it makes it a little bit difficult, I suppose, if you're Steve Clarke and you're Scotland. Do you want to try and pick a player who's not played a lot of football this season, but by the same token has been in and around the Scotland camps before, can deal with that pressure, has played in the top flight, and of course, the experience he has and the leadership is an invaluable skill.
Yeah, like you say, it's a real shame with Hanley that injuries have had such an effect on his career. He's been capped 48 times by Scotland, so if he gets 2 more, he enters our Roll of Honour. I just wanted your take, because obviously he was named club captain at Norwich. I think it's a bit of a shame, the reputation he's got at times, because he gets a lot of criticism among Scotland supporters, because when he does have an off day, as I'm sure you've seen down the years at Norwich, he can have some high profile mistakes. But I just want your take on what Hanley at his best looks like, because for me, as you say, he is an old school centre back, and I think part of his hard rep is down to the way he looks, and he's an old fashioned centre back. But at his best, as you say, he's deceptively very quick, very strong, and he's the kind of player that I think that can compete with the top strikers on a physical level. Do you have memories of a prime Grant Hanley, for example? Because I do feel that he gets, a bit unfair criticism at times.
Yeah, I think he's a big game player. I mean, anyone that watched Scotland versus England last time in the Euros, I think he schooled Harry Kane that day. And I think most Norwich fans had seen that probably throughout sort of the time in the Premier League that season, where I felt he was at his best, and there was kind of maybe Premier League interest at different points, and likes of West Ham had sort of looked at him and thought this guy could fit our team and what we're trying to do. I think they went for Craig Dawson in the end, but that kind of ability of player where he's a little bit more old school, but you know what you're going to get with him, the leadership, the sort of no-nonsense defending. If it involves clearing it out, he'll be there. And I think in the big games for Norwich, he's always stepped up to the mark, which is why I feel if they get to the playoffs, he is that kind of player that's well-suited. And if you're Scotland and you go into the Euros and you want someone that's got that sort of nous and know-how, I think he's the perfect player for that. But then the concern, obviously, as I mentioned, is that injury record and the fitness element that has kind of been such a disappointment, I suppose, throughout his whole Norwich career, because we all know that if he's fit, he's probably our best central defender.
Yeah, I think if he was fully fit and ready to go for the Euros, he would be our number one pick in the hard defence. He's a very trusted figure by Steve Clarke, and as you said, he did very well at the last Euros. And as you say, he tends to step it up when it matters. He played very well when we beat Spain as well. So it's a bit of a shame. I think we might be a worse team for Grant Hanley not being there, which is maybe a controversial statement, but I think in that centre-back role that we play in the back three, Hanley is a real leader as well, and he's amazing in the air. So it's a shame, but let's see. Maybe he'll show up well in training and get the nod from Steve Clarke. On to some previous players, because the Scotland-Norwich connection doesn't just stem from this season. One that I'm particularly keen to ask you about, because I'm sure you'll be aware there was a bit of back and forth on Twitter, shall we say, from a player who, I'm not sure if you're aware, is very popular among Scotland fans, is Billy Gilmour, who went on loan to Norwich upon the promotion to the Premier League, but he had a bit of a hard time there. How would you summarise his loan period at Norwich?
Wrong club, wrong time, I feel, is probably what it was with Billy Gilmour. I mean, obviously, he was off the back of that Euros where he was unbelievable. And I remember when he arrived, it was kind of the hype around him amongst sort of the city of Norwich. Everyone was sort of buzzing that this young kid who had ripped it up in the Premier League with Chelsea when he was given an opportunity. There was that cup game against Liverpool where he was unbelievable, the Euros, and it all felt, we've got this player that potentially could help us try and stabilise in the Premier League, which has obviously been a bit of a downfall of Norwich throughout recent history more generally. And you could see the technical ability was there, but he was a little bit lightweight, maybe didn't quite suit the system at the time, and particularly under Daniel Farke, where it was quite free-flowing football, and I thought maybe that might help him, but I think probably given his lack of kind of physicality, Norwich got overrun a lot in the midfield, and he kind of came in for a lot of criticism around that. they then bring in Dean Smith, and their two values probably didn't really align. He's more of a sort of old school manager who sort of relies on senior pros, and Billy Gilmour obviously doesn't quite tick that box at that point. But glad to see him kick on at Brighton, because we always knew there was a player there that could go on and have a top career. But for me, at the time, it was probably the wrong loan. He needed a loan to a more established Premier League club where they'd maybe give him a little bit more opportunity. And if he made those mistakes, he could probably get away with it because the calibre of players around him are of a higher stock at Norwich. You make a mistake in the Premier League and it's going to cost you. And, when you kind of maybe going to struggle to find the back of the net at the other end, that mistake can cost you all 3 points. So for those reasons, yeah, it just didn't really work. But, glad to see him kick on elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a very fair assessment. It's good to see that he's kicked on, as you say, at Brighton now, doing very well there. And as you say, that might have served him well to go on and work harder maybe to forge a career in the Premier League, which he is doing now at Brighton. It can be a vehicle of resilience sometimes when loan spells don't go as well as perhaps had hoped at the start. Anyway, going back further into the past, first up, a figure who's actually a championship manager at potentially a playoff rival, is Russell Martin. He was captain at Norwich. What did you make of him as a player?
Yeah, he was sort of a player almost in the Grant Hanley camp, where he was quite divisive at different points, but he played over 300 games for the club, joined us in League One, was part of the title-winning season, was sort of established himself, I suppose, in that side under Paul Lambert, who he'd worked with previously at Wycombe, and from then on, he was named club captain in sort of the Championship Premier League times, and he was just a consistent 7 out of 10 performer week in, week out. And I think, his leadership and what he'd done for the community off the pitch meant, he sort of endeared himself to the Norwich fan base, and they still love him now. I think if you probably asked most Norwich fans in sort of a quiet space whether they want to see Russell Martin manage the club in the future, I think majority would say yes. Of course, won the playoff final with us, lifted the trophy at Wembley, which is a moment, that sticks with any Norwich fan of any age who was there on that day. So, for those reasons, he's pretty much sort of forged in Norwich folklore, I suppose, in terms of what he'd done for the club and sort of the positive moments. There was a few relegations in there, and he was, I suppose, the scapegoat for that. He had to come out and speak to the media as the captain, and came under fire for various things he said at different points. But that's, difficult moments, and, the player has to come up and face up to that. And he always done that, to his credit. So for those reasons, I think, most Norwich fans would probably have him in sort of their sort of more memorable, I suppose, 21st century teams. He'd probably get in most. He's probably potentially in mine that I might be asked later. So yeah, certainly a great figure. And yeah, great to see him doing well now on a managerial basis as well. But hopefully for us, if we do meet him in the playoffs, he can have an off day on that day.
I love that. Yeah, a few of these Scottish players might figure in your lifetime 11 a bit later on. He's a very likeable figure. I like the way he handles himself in the media, and he speaks well, Russell Martin, so I wish him the best. Potentially a future Norwich manager, potentially a future Scotland manager too. Up next, he's actually from my hometown. Well, he went to my high school, is Stephen Whittaker. What did you make of him as a Norwich player?
Yeah, he was another consistent performer throughout sort of the Premier League. He joined after he left Rangers, and of course, that was probably a big move for him, a chance to go and play in the Premier League with a side that then, I think, established himself for the first season in the Premier League, 2011-12. He joined, and that was under Chris Hughton, which was a much more defensive style of football, which most Norwich fans didn't really like. But for Stephen Whittaker, he was probably one of the sort of fullbacks that could get forward and had that licence to do that. And he actually benefited from that, scored a few big goals at different points that stick in my memory in terms of the Premier League. There was one really good goal. Anyone can go and find it against Swansea. He basically done a run from the halfway line, took on the whole defence and slotted it in the bottom corner. And that goal will forever live with me. So, yeah, I think as well he was part of the Wembley team that got promoted through the playoffs against Middlesbrough. It was his through ball to Nathan Redmond that set up the second goal. So he's another one of them players where you hear that commentary and his name's in it. Yeah, he's got a good reputation. Probably a little bit of an underrated player, probably is what I'd say about him. He's one that maybe didn't always get the headlines, but was always consistent and is well-liked character. And, I think any Norwich fan you mention his name to would have good things to say about him.
I remember he scored a very good individual goal during his time at Rangers as well. A funny anecdote as well, actually. My friend won a pair of auction Stephen Whittaker boots for Norwich that got passed down to me. So for about a season when I played football, I was wearing Stephen Whittaker's Norwich boots. So there you go. On to the next. Is a match winner on his day for Scotland and during his club career, a certain Robert Snodgrass. What did you make of his time at Carrow Road?
Yeah, he was one of sort of this Leeds contingent that we bought. We had a spell where they were almost our feeder club when they were sort of in the Championship and League One, and we brought in him, Johnny Howson, Luciano Becchio, Bradley Johnson, lots of sort of players, some of which had successful times with Norwich, and Robert Snodgrass was one who definitely had a successful time with the club. A couple of seasons here, scored some really big goals. Free kicks was obviously his kind of bread and butter. Whenever he got the ball sort of in and around the edge of the box with a free kick, you knew it was going to hit the back of the net. There was a few memorable ones, one against West Ham, one against Tottenham. And he's a player who obviously we all knew was of a Premier League calibre, which is obviously why when we got relegated, we all kind of consigned ourselves to the fact he was going to move on and get that move to Hull City in the Premier League. We benefited from that, made some money off him, and he went on to obviously have a successful career still in the Premier League post that with, Hull, West Ham and various other clubs. And yeah, for me, on his day, very old school winger, bit of pace about him, a little bit of trickery, but not kind of, your sort of pacey young winger that you get these days. Much more of an old school cloth sort of where he's cut from. But well liked again, well loved character. And sort of that Scottish humour that he brought to the dressing room, I think, was good to see. He always got on well with everyone in the dressing room and in the camp, and had a positive impact, even when sort of the moments were tough and Norwich were fighting relegation. I think he kept the spirits high, and of course he was a quality player on his day. So yeah, lots of good things to say about Robert Snodgrass, and obviously recently retired, so hopefully he's enjoying life. Maybe out on the golf course. I know he's one for golf.
Yeah, I was going to say, by all accounts, a great character too. Possibly a dream podcast guest for either myself or yourself on the Pink Un. I've heard there's a lot of funny stories about Snodgrass. And finally, just before we go into your lifetime 11, a few of these players actually might potentially feature, is somebody who's forging a successful early managerial spell so far. Another potential future Norwich manager is a certain Stephen Naismith. How was his time at Norwich?
Yeah, massively disappointing. Arrived for big money in the January. We were fighting relegation, so that's been in 2015-16 under Alex Neil, of course, a Scottish manager well known for his time at Hamilton. Yeah, it bought in for sort of 7 or 8, 9 million from Everton, who had obviously done really well for it in the Premier League. And I think at that time we were all really excited and thought this could be the man to keep us up and score the goals. On his debut, he scored against Liverpool, which of course for him personally would have been a great moment against kind of the rivals of the side he used to play for. In a bonkers game, we lost 5-4. Jurgen Klopp was on the pitch, broke his glasses that day. It was a bit of a mad occasion, but yeah, just
remember that one.
Yeah, it was a bonkers game, one for the wrong reasons went against us, but just never worked for him. Even when we dropped to the Championship, he was a very much in and out of sort of favour player. When he played, there were some games where he turned up, some where maybe you felt he didn't almost have the willpower or the motivation to play. And I think, that led it to criticism, and sort of the recruitment at Norwich got a lot of stick for that signing. That many fans felt they could have spent the money better on someone else. But of course, that's recruitment in football. Some work, some don't. And I think he was never really that settled here. It was obviously a long way away from Scotland, a long way from his family at that time. We were up in Merseyside, and I can imagine for a player moving down to Norfolk, which is kind of cut off a little bit from the rest of the world, and sometimes it feels. I can imagine that was difficult. It just didn't work out for him, but obviously he's a successful player at international level and in the Premier League with Everton. So, there's no doubt in his ability. It just, again, wrong player, wrong time, just didn't work at Norwich.
That's good insight. Yeah, I remember his goal against Liverpool, but I didn't realise it didn't pan out as well further down the line. But he's doing very well as a young manager at heart, so maybe he can fare better as a potential future manager at Norwich, because I think English clubs may look at him if he continues to do so well at Tynecastle. So anyway, yeah, I forgot about, there's so many connections between Scotland and Norwich. Alex Neil as well. But on we go then, Adam, put you on the spot here. So if you can first tell me the first era that you remember supporting Norwich, when you first started to go watch matches, and then if you can put together your favourite 11 of players, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I sort of first went to games sort of 2004, 2005, so we were in the Premier League, we beat Man United when they were sort of in their prime, Alex Ferguson era, some really good players around that time, the likes of Dean Ashton, who of course done well at West Ham and other places in the Premier League. Darren Huckabee, who's an absolute club legend at Norwich City.
Nice one. You can start off then in goals. Who are you saying?
I'm going to go with, I think for me, John Ruddy. He joined Norwich in 2010. We'd just been promoted back to the Championship after a title winning season in League One, and from there on, I mean, his consistency in terms of his levels in goal, he got into the Premier League, and he's been linked with the likes of Chelsea and sort of other top flight clubs at that elite level because of his performances. He got himself in the England setup, got an England cap while on the books at Norwich City against Italy away, played the second half. And for me, there's been plenty of maybe better goalkeepers or better calibre goalkeepers, but just for pure consistency and the success that he had throughout his whole tenure really at the club, I think John Ruddy is probably a little bit unrivalled in that position.
It's interesting. He actually played in Scotland, I believe, with Motherwell earlier on in his career. So what formation are you going for? Back four?
Go for back four, yeah.
Nice one.
Left back, I'm going for Adam Drury, who is a club legend actually at Norwich. Sort of had about a 10+ year spell here, a testimonial at the end of it, and actually against Celtic, funny enough, their fans came down and sort of took over our pubs even for a game of that nature. Yeah, it's consistency again for me. That's probably the key. Maybe not so much, you sort of full-blooded pacey fullback, but certainly just for defensively on his game left every single week. You could trust him to put in those tackles, and even if it was in and around the penalty area where there's potential danger, you can give away a dangerous free kick or a penalty, he'd always get it right and win the ball. So yeah, club legend, and I think he's part of the Hall of Fame down here.
Love that. Right back?
Right back, I'm going for Russell Martin, who obviously I've already outlined. I know he played centre back at lots of time during his Norwich career, but he started a majority of his time at right back, particularly sort of the first 4 or 5 seasons here, and that's probably where I have the most sort of memorable moments of him as a player. Some of the goals he scored, some of the sort of moments. I mean, when we got promoted to back to the Premier League in 2010-11, there's him in his underpants at Fratton Park celebrating the promotion. Some really great moments, and for me, they all came from when he was playing right back. So yeah, he's my main man at right back.
Nice. Yeah, I remember he played right back as well. How about in the middle, 2 centre backs?
2 centre backs. I mean, centre backs is not something that I've seen a lot of really good ones, I suppose, throughout my sort of time supporting Norwich. I know anyone that's kind of just pre me would have a few. That the likes of Malky Mackay, of course, also a Scotsman, likes of Craig Fleming, but during sort of my time, Tim Closer is one that's going in there. A little bit of an injury-riddled player, but on his day, I mean, a Swiss international, we paid good money for him from the Bundesliga when he arrived. And, I mean, for me, it's probably the moment he scored against Ipswich Town in the 95th minute to keep our unbeaten record against them. An unbelievable moment because Ipswich had just scored. It was about the 89th minute they took the lead, and he scored the equaliser. So that goal gets replayed on social media and throughout Norwich fans' sort of YouTube feeds, whatever it might be, on probably a daily basis. To be fair, it's one of those moments. So for those reasons,
that goal alone earns him a place in your team.
That's what's basically done it, because we've not got that many other good centre backs. The other one alongside him, going for Sebastian Versong, of course, a player who was well renowned for his time at Tottenham, had a spell at Wolves, but arrived at Norwich maybe sort of looking to try and rekindle his career a little bit in the Premier League. And the first sort of season particularly, he got player of the season down here. Some of the links he got sort of to top flight clubs, again at the top end of the Premier League. Because of that season, he decided to stay. He was also part of the side that won at Wembley. So for me, a key figure throughout some of the good times. And for those reasons, he deserves a spot in this team.
Nice one. Yeah, I remember Bassong. He was a top defender. What formation are you saying? 4-3-3, 4-4-2?
I'll go for a 4-4-2, but there's going to be a few kind of players that will be, they're willing to play other positions as well.
That's classic in one of these 11s, right? On you go. Who's in the midfield?
So on the right-hand side, I'm going for Darren Huckabee, a player that was probably the first player for me that I ever really, truly loved, an absolute great down here. A player that played for Manchester City, played for Coventry in the Premier League, arrived at Norwich, and he was originally here on loan. The fans took to him and basically sort of actually helped it in terms of fundraising for his transfer, because they were willing to get him over the line and make him a permanent figure. And he still lives in Norfolk.
Mad story there.
Yeah, he still lives in Norfolk now. He's an ambassador for the football club. He's at every home game near enough, and he riles up Ipswich fans on Twitter. So that's also great to see. Just a superb player, pure pace, pure trickery. The goals he scored for us, and again, just the dedication and the loyalty to the football club. Even after his times where he's departed the club, and that was difficult for him because it came under a spell where it was under Glenn Roeder in the Championship, and the club sort of decided to let him go in sort of difficult circumstances. I know him personally would have took that, pretty hard, but even despite that, he decided to stick with the club throughout that. So for those reasons, he makes it in the team. The other side, I'm going to go for Emi Buendia, who, of course, is now at Aston Villa, a player we brought in for peanuts, really, from the second division in Spain, from Getafe. When he arrived,
what a piece of scouting that is.
It's an unbelievable piece of scouting. Stuart Webber, our sporting director at the time, deserves huge credit for that, because they paid about $1 million for him, and we could see the quality when we arrived straight away. He wasn't really getting any games over in Spain, but we were a little bit like, who's this guy they brought in? And you kind of get that when a player's maybe got the name and you hope they're going to be really good, but then they don't turn out to be that way. But he's kind of lived up to it. The flair, the technical ability of the player. I think for me, he's probably the best I've ever seen. Just in little tight spaces, what he can do with the ball is absolutely magical. He basically single-handedly won us the title in the Championship on 2 occasions. Even in the Premier League, he sort of got double figures in terms of goal contributions in a pretty poor Norwich side. And it was the relationship he had with a striker I'm going to mention in a moment that basically endeared himself to the Norwich fans. They absolutely loved him. And he also then went on and was our record sale, £33 million to Aston Villa. So, the financial benefit, I suppose, of that for us, which is a self-funding club, it was, absolutely vital. So more than deserving of his place in this team. Yeah. Another one who's ripping it up, I suppose, in the Premier League now, James Maddison, a player who I know had a loan spell up in Scotland as well. He arrived from Coventry for sort of £3 million when we're in the Premier League, got loaned straight back to Coventry, and just wasn't really seen as a player under Alex Neil that he wanted to play. And I suppose most Norwich fans felt a little bit frustrated at that, because they could see there was a player there with lots of ability from sort of the glimpses we'd seen off the bench or cup games or pre-season, whatever it might have been, and got the loan move to Aberdeen. And obviously, the free kick, anyone's seen that goal that is always still replayed, I think probably from an Aberdeen end. He's a well-loved figure from his time there. Came back.
Yeah, Norwich against Rangers, that free kick.
That's right, yeah. Daniel Farke arrives at Norwich, who was kind of very much centred around, he came from Borussia Dortmund's second team, so sort of very focused on youth. He looked at James Maddison in pre-season, kind of I want to say cockiness, but it's almost like self-belief in himself that he knows he's got the ability, and he liked that about him. And the one season he had basically where he broke through, he got double figures in terms of goal contributions. We all knew at that time he was going to be an England international, just an unbelievable player. Some of the goals, also scored a winner at Portman Road, so that sticks out in the memory. Just a player that we knew when he went to Leicester. It was probably the right move for him, because you often see it where these players at maybe the top end of the Championship, they go and push themselves into kind of the elite clubs that, and maybe it doesn't work out for them because they don't get the game time. He looked at Leicester, thought that's the perfect stepping stone, and of course he's now ended up at Tottenham. And I know he's not done quite so well in recent weeks, but sort of prior to that, the start of the season, he was more than proving his worth. So yeah, he makes it in the team. The other one in the sort of attacking midfield position for me, Wes Hoolahan. Anyone that's a Championship observer or even a Premier League observer will know just how much of a god this guy is to Norwich fans.
He's actually another one, believe it or not, that played in Scotland.
You're right.
For Livingston.
Yeah, you're right. He did. Yeah, had sort of a spell at Blackpool. We signed him. There was a season we went down to League One, and he sort of struggled initially when he got into the side, but the League One season, him and another striker I'm going to mention in a moment had a really good relationship, and from that moment on, I mean, just again the pure technical ability that guy had for his age. He was a bit of a fine wine player in that he got better with age. Just the ability with the ball, taking on defenders, the skills. He had everything in his locker. The sort of low centre of gravity, I suppose he had. He could just sort of win the ball and take it past players for fun. And just for me, I mean, in terms of pure legend, I think he's probably the best of my time. I absolutely love that guy.
I've noticed on social media how much Norwich fans love Wes Hoolahan.
Yeah, just I think anyone even of like a Championship, you've on these sort of Championship street players where you sort of say, oh, do you remember when Wes Hoolahan was in the Championship? Just probably in the all-time Championship 11, sort of certainly this decade. Just what a player on his day. So for him, yeah, still loved it, and I think he lives down in Norfolk as well, so still often see him playing for like Sunday League teams in Norfolk, which is good to see. The front two,
wow, opposition defences must not like that.
No, even now I think he'd probably still rival a lot of these players in this Norwich side at the moment, so that's just how good he is. In terms of the front two, Grant Holt, again, a player we signed for absolute peanuts. When
played for Hibs as well.
He did, yeah.
Running theme here.
Yeah. Yeah, just again signed for nothing from that had been from Carlisle, I think at the time, and just came in, and it was sort of a fit that was perfect. A Norwich side that was just been relegated. The fans were frustrated. They were disappointed they were in League One, and he was kind of this figure they brought in, and there was he scored goals at that level, but we were all a little bit like, is he going to fit kind of this? He's sort of a smaller player, then coming to a big pond in Norwich, who were a big side, of course, in League One at those times, and he just got on with it from minute one. He had everything in terms of a striker. The physicality scared the life out of any defender. the leadership of a man who just, been around the block. He knew what it took to get this team through, but it was more that what he'd done with the club. He scored the most goals in League One. He then went to the Championship, scored goals there, then got Norwich in the Premier League and scored double figures. And for me, he should have got an England cap off the back of that first season. He scored, I think, 15 goals in the Premier League. I'd have to double check that figure.
I was going to say, I'm a big fantasy football player, and I remember I had Grant Holt as one of my strikers. Good value pick back then. He scored a lot of goals in the Premier League.
Yeah. And I think it was just the nature of them. I mean, he's sort of one of these players, I don't want to swear, but he's in the house category of player, just winding up defenders and winding up opposition.
Never heard that before, house category, I rate that.
But yeah, just an unbelievable striker, and again, a club legend. I think, we had Ipswich down here the other week, and before the game, they unveiled Grant Holt. He scored a hat-trick against them, just gets the fans on board straight away. He's given the away opposition fans stick, and he's obviously not even playing for us anymore. So that's how
he's another one who's a lively character.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, lots of interesting stories of him in terms of celebrations and promotions and various sort of acts he'd done off the pitch in terms of nightclubs and various things. So yeah, certainly a player of interest. And then the one alongside him is a certain Finnish striker who maybe flopped a little bit in Scotland with Celtic, but certainly for Norwich City fans, the absolute GOAT. Timu Pukki arrived on a free transfer from Bromby. At the time, we signed Jordan Rhodes, who of course also got the links to Scotland. He was probably the one we felt was going to be the number one striker that season. Timu Pukki comes in, initially was played in the number 10 role, but I think we all kind of could see that he had the ability to play in sort of the number 9 role as such, maybe not in terms of physical presence, but in terms of what he could do getting in behind, which when you've got Emi Buendia, I mentioned, with sort of the ability to find those little pockets and just pick out balls where nobody else could do it. Them two linked up perfectly, and his goal ratio speaks for itself. I think it was almost in the end 1 goal every 2 games. It wasn't far off, and bear in mind that was in the Championship, in the Premier League. He won Premier League Player of the Month, Championship Player of the Season, Norwich Player of the Season about 3 times, 2 titles. I could go on with everything he won down here. So for those reasons, when he departed last season at the end, we played Blackpool at home. We lost 1-0, but I mean, any Norwich fan there that day, the ovation he got was, and sort of the tears, I suppose, in the stands. I've not seen that for too many players, down the years. So for what he's done and sort of the magnitude of what he achieved, yeah, I think for me, he's up there in terms of the best.
Nice one, and I'll put up a nice graphic. So if you could just read through your 1 to 11 again.
We've got John Ruddy in goal. We've got Adam Drury at left back. We've got Basong and Tim Closer at centre back. Russell Martin at right back. Then you've got Buendia, Darren Huckabee, Wes Houlihan, James Maddison, Timu Pukki, and Grant Holt. So that's my personal Norwich 11.
Love it. And just to finish off, if you could quickly just tell me your favourite manager, and also we have a series in this podcast where you pick your favourite player or manager, so one of those players that you've selected or the manager you're about to select, to enter the Scott Ball Podcast Hall of Fame. Who would be your number 1?
Oh, I'm toying. There's 2 managers, but one, there's a bit more controversy around it. Also a Scotsman, Paul Lambert, of course, arrived at Norwich when we were in League One, took us to the title that season, then took us into the Championship, got us promoted again, so back-to-back promotions, went to the Premier League, stabilised us there for 1 season, then got obviously the move to Aston Villa, which didn't work out for him, but unfortunately for him, he tarnished his kind of Norwich City legacy a little bit by going to our rivals, Ipswich Town. I know he didn't do very well there and actually took them down, so in some ways it's kind of funny.
Agent Lambert.
Yeah, that's what he was named at the time, but I think for that, it's difficult to maybe go with him. So I've got to go for Daniel Farker, who's just an absolute god to Norwich fans. Of course, doing relatively good things at Leeds. I know there's a little bit of criticism for him for the way they've dropped off in recent weeks. But at Norwich, yeah, I mean, he came into the club at a difficult period where we were financially in sort of a lot of difficulty. The recruitment had to be sort of clever. We had to go get players for free or players who were available on loan. And he masterminded a side eventually that won the title against some pretty big sides that year. The likes of Aston Villa, the likes of Leeds, Sheffield United, sides that, have all done well in the Championship down the years. So to do that, get to the Premier League. I know it didn't work out and he got us relegated. And then we came back to Championship, won it again, and then got us relegated again. But for me, I think, when you're Norwich and you go into the Premier League, and we all know it now, you look at it this season, Sheffield United, Burnley and Luton look fairly likely to come straight back down. It's a different animal up there. So I don't really judge him on that. I judge him on the success in the Championship and back-to-back titles in 2 seasons against some pretty good opposition with a limited budget. For me, probably the best manager of my lifetime.
Love it. And the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, Hall of Fame. let's go Wes Hoolahan. He deserves a Hall of Fame position anywhere, whether that's in Norwich, Championship, across the world football, Ireland, you name it. He deserves a place in the Hall of Fame.
As you say, a streets will never forget player, especially in the Championship.
Yeah.
That's great, Adam. Honestly, thanks very much for your time. You've got amazing knowledge. I wish you all the best with your job, the podcast, and let's hope you go up and there'll be a few more Scots in the Premier League next year.
Let's hope so. Thanks for having me on, James. Appreciate it.